Business leaders know the future is already here. The economy is shifting. Non-humans are entering the workforce. Nothing feels certain. SHRM understands those evolving challenges, both in the workplace and the wider world. In this podcast, we'll bring together authors, researchers, executives, and non-traditional experts to help you take on the challenges others haven't yet considered. Because you don't need to be a futurist, you need actionable insights now. You need to be a Tomorrowist. I'm Jerry Wan. Welcome to Tomorrowist, where we explore the trends shaping the future of work. This week, we're diving into a rising threat in the private sector, corporate espionage. From drone surveillance to cyber infiltration, tools once used in warfare are now targeting data, infrastructure, and executives. Joining us is Dale Buckner, CEO of Global Guardian, and a retired Army colonel with experience in counterterrorism and special operations. Dale, welcome to Tomorrowist.
Thank you, Jerry. How are you?
Good. We're going to be talking about a light topic today, corporate espionage, surveillance, threats to not only digital infrastructure, but perhaps even our physical security and physical safety for business leaders and just, broadly speaking. And, we've seen certainly examples of all the things that we just mentioned in the news as of late. And so really, excited to talk to you about what is happening, what are the trends, and what our leaders and our audience can really be focused on and paying attention to protect themselves and their organizations. And so let's start high level from your vantage point, and then you have experience in this running Global Guardian. What does today's global threat environment look like for business organizations?
So, Jerry, I'll start with one word to describe it: complicated. The threats for corporate America, if you compare and contrast it to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, we're in a different world. And the speed of change and the threat vectors of running a corporate headquarters are changing literally day to day, hour to hour. So one, it's simply more complicated. Two, I think as a C-suite leader or any kind of leader in the organization, you cannot bury your head in the sand. You have to be watching geopolitics, geoeconomics, obviously the change in cyber threats and AI as that's coming online. War, conflict, active shooter, manipulation of people while they travel, people working from home. What does that provide access to back into the corporation, so on and so forth. So simply put, it's more complicated than ever.
Is there a checklist or, you mentioned a lot of things. And I think, if we start to think about what we've seen in the news or even some of the things that we've experienced, right? If you've ever worked for a company now, phishing training is commonplace, right? Being mindful of the emails that you get or even the phone calls that you get. And that's sort of on the lower end of things. And then there's obviously the physical threats and then even physical acts of violence that we've seen against organizations and people and all these things. And so how has that evolved from, we'll use the term espionage, but threats to both entities and people? How has that evolved? And, tell us about sort of how does that increase sort of the checklist of things that leaders have to be thinking about?
Yeah. So as I've kind of teased out those macro items in the first question, when you think about this, I think that just having phishing training that used to be considered 10 years ago very advanced, right? Now you're in eighth grade. That's literally eighth grade. As you think about what's happening both in the US government and what's happening in corporate supply chain and the theft of IP and cyber, it's way beyond a video telling you to question the email or the person calling you. I think when you think about travel, having a quote unquote duty of care provider that travel tracks people and sends them an alert of a quote unquote threat, it's not enough, because the question is in all of these scenarios, whether it's a physical threat, infrastructure threat, digital or cyber, or your supply chain, in every one of these cases, all of the things that were acceptable or frankly viable 10, 20, 30 years ago, the simple answer to your question is you now have to go 10 steps deeper. When you're hiring a C-suite member now, it can't be an electronic survey or background check on them, because if you're hiring someone that comes from a country where there is no data on them, like Western Europe, like the US, you now have to do a deep dive. You might have to go interview employees in a foreign country or employers. You might have to go interview family members in a foreign country. you need to truly understand what is behind that executive. When you look at your supply chain 20, 30, 40 years ago, you knew you had a supplier on the other side of the world, and you didn't pay much attention beyond that, that they might have been compliant or legal in that country and that it was okay for you to do business. Now you need to do a deep dive because you need to know if they're owned by a shell company. You need to understand, is that shell company owned by the Chinese, the Russians? Are they infiltrated? And in crisis, whether that's COVID or a future conflict, you really need to understand who is your partner in that supply chain? Who are they owned by? What is that structure? And will they be there in the next big crisis? All these things now matter. Simply going back to, it's more complicated, more due diligence, more rigor, more systems, more software has to be expended if you're going to operate in the current world. It's just more complicated.
I want to say at the top, this is not a let's scare everybody conversation. These are
Sure.
the things, obviously, we want to make sure things that you and your team and your organization probably never have to rely on, right? And the best way to protect against that is to be proactive. And so, some of the things that I think Dale and I are going to talk about today might be new to you, or hope and our goal isn't to get you to react in an impulsive way, but it is to broaden the idea of what you need to be thinking about, and the pace of change with technology. We talked about, um, somebody can probably, now with great accuracy, spoof somebody's voice, spoof even somebody's video calls from your boss saying, "Hey, can you do this for me? Can you send me information or money or all these things?" Um, let's talk about sort of the breadth of the things that we've talked about in terms of threats. Um, Given your specialty, where does the intersection of sort of warfare tactics and sort of the more intense threats blending into the private sector today?
Yeah. So I'll answer this in 2 points. If you think about what was traditionally nation state on nation state, trying to get IP, trying to get secrets, trying to steal future plans, so on and so forth. When you think about that, that tradecraft of what the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, our adversaries globally, that was a world, if you will, that didn't replicate itself in corporate America. If you think back to, and this is ran in the news several times over the last, call it 5 to 7 years, the stealing of the F-22 and the F-35 Raptor, the plans of that were stolen by a manufacturer here in the United States by the Chinese, and they used it to build their future aircraft. That was something, if you were sitting in a corporate headquarters, that was something that happened in the government, nation state on nation state. The issue now is those same tactics are bleeding themselves into corporate America for simply one term: competition. Ultimately, if you're in the corporate space, it doesn't matter if you're in finance, manufacturing, healthcare, insurance, whatever it might be, everyone is now looking for that first mover advantage. And we are living, without question, as you brought up, we're living in a race for AI. Who is going to solve this first? To use a sports analogy, if this is a four quarter game, we're in the first minute of a four-quarter game. We haven't even started. This is wildly immature. And you're right. That being said, our voice right now, people will see this. They'll be able to take my voice, your voice, my image, your image. And the voice was first, right? The AI picked up on the voice very quickly. And then the video was kind of janky in the beginning, and so on and so forth. Now it's matured materially. And if someone found this online, they could use my voice, my image, or your voice, your image, and they can inject themselves in different ways. So all of these things are true. They're all happening. And ultimately, because of global competition and access to information, our adversaries have been able to speed up their
Mm.
ability to steal IP, to steal future plans. And that isn't just cyber. Now, that's where a lot of people focus. Obviously, we're looking at $10 trillion in losses globally through cyber theft this year alone. 10 trillion, not million, not billions, trillion with a T. When I brief that, most people are staggered by that fact. $10 trillion in losses globally this year on the cyber side. But make no mistake, in corporate America, your greatest vulnerability is your people, without
Mm.
question. Because no matter how good the software, no matter how good your access control systems are, no matter how good your training is on a monthly basis, human interaction is always the weakest link. What they do, what they send, what they provide access to, what system they're using for security when they travel in foreign lands. Do they connect to the hotel Wi-Fi, the Starbucks Wi-Fi, whatever? All of that protocol matters in a big way. The human being will always be the weakest link in your chain to stop that theft, if you will. So all of these things, as earlier stated, they're all moving quickly. It is more complicated than ever. But ultimately, that tradecraft of how the Chinese targeted one of our large manufacturers in the defense space, make no mistake, the infiltration of people into our banking system has been alive for the last 50 years. Now it's hitting a crescendo. The amount of IP leaving our banking system and financial institutions has become a bit of a factory for our adversaries. All of that tradecraft has made it into corporate America. And I think that's where getting corporate leaders to think like that and understand that and ask a very simple question. What is it my company does where I have IP that I would consider sensitive? And I hate to use the word secret, but it does apply in many cases. What is it we have or do that is secret now or in the future that I need to protect? And then ask yourself, how would a competitor or an adversary, how could they attack my organization to get that IP or that information? And it all comes down to systems, typically on the cyber side, and then most importantly, people. Who has access? What can depart the building? How can it depart? What do they have access to remotely? So on and so forth. But all of that tradecraft that you used to think 20, 30, 40 years ago was just in the movies, just in spy novels, so on and so forth. Make no doubt, make absolutely no doubt whatsoever. It is completely infiltrated into the Western business environment. And now it's something that C-suite leaders have to be thinking about, and they have to be asking themselves that key question of what is it I have and how am I going to protect it?
I think there's so many different angles to even think about it and talk about security, right? I think you mentioned the example of the fighter jet, where there was a clear delineation of what side, let's call it to use a broad term, one should be on. But as the business world has evolved with technology, with even the complex multinational structure of what was once American companies for legal, tax, whatever reasons, this concept of alignment, to put it loosely, and perhaps loyalty and just, being on the same team has also gotten, difficult or less clear along the ways. And so I think that also further adds to the complexity of, when we talk about foreign adversaries, it could also be that many organizations that of our audience has offices, has subsidiaries. It's not crystal clear anymore. So I do agree with you that it is, there's so many things in terms of structure, technology, protocols, and even people. Like you said, these are things that we grew up watching in movies and saying like, "Oh, wow, that's silly. They got away with that." And now it's probably happening as we speak. Um, what are not to? It's not a binary question or a mutually exclusive one, Dale. But how does one balance the need for, as a leader, the tools, and then the people, and then the follow up to that is how you create a culture of trust and of leadership when humans are the potential weakest link, and you have to trust but verify.
So you're taking words right out of my mouth. I'll answer this in three pieces. Number one, trust and verify is your baseline. The verification is that the level of due diligence and scrutiny on your supply chain, on your systems, on your IT, on your cyber, and then again, your partners and the people. The verify is the place where we're failing, right? We
Mm.
just don't put enough rigor in it. We overtrust, we overshare, and then we have problems. So that's number one. Number two, at a nation state to nation state, what's changed in the world in terms of geopolitics, that again, that is different than 20 to 50 years ago, is that 30, 40 years ago, the United States truly was the only true superpower in the world. And we could influence our allies to do things and act a certain way and to compartmentalize them to say, no, 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 you can't do business with that country or that entity because they would be considered an adversary either nation state to nation state or in business. Now the world's changed. The definition, and this is really the point of my second part of the question, the definition of ally has wildly changed. So the UAE is a very, very important ally to the United States in the Middle East. It is a pathway into that world. Saudi Arabia is a very important partner in the Middle East. When you think about India, India has been wildly integrated into corporate America for the last 70 years and all the things we kind of outsource within that market. So a simple question to demonstrate what's changed is India buying cheap Russian oil right now, knowing that we, the United States and the West and NATO countries, want to end the war. And by de facto, India, who is Western leaning and in many cases considered a Western ally, their response is, I understand, but I have 1.3 billion people to feed, and I'm driving the biggest democracy in the world. I have the opportunity to buy cheap oil. I'm buying it. So even though they're Western leaning and considered ally in many cases, they're still going to operate and do business with our adversaries, which 50 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. The UAE is a partner and a friend and important to us, but yet, make no mistake, they're doing business in Iran. And that is an example where the definition of ally has changed, where it's much more transactional. When we are aligned, we're allies. When we are not, or when there are other places to go and other markets for opportunity, people are going to, or countries and leaders are operating within the spheres. What's good for my nation state? What's good for my company? And it might not always align the way it did in the past from a geopolitical standpoint. So that definition and that pivot have really changed things in a big, big way. So the second part of my answer. And then the third simply is that verification of going much, much deeper. As we've found with our corporate clients, we dig into their supply chain and they find out that they moved to Mexico to nearshore. Great news story. Everybody's happy. We're avoiding some things that are going on in Europe and Asia and so on and so forth. Next thing you know, we dig deep into that supply chain and the cartels pop up. And the cartels are literally the outsourced supply chain to move your product across from Mexico to the United States. The cartels are involved in the finance team. The cartels are the local security, and you go deeper and deeper and deeper. So another example where that ability to go much, much deeper than ever before to really understand the structure of your partner so that you can trust them, and then being very, very, very particular about how much information you share, what access your partners have, and your stated intent for the future. All of those things now need to be managed and looked at almost in a government-esque way of that is secret. It's beyond sensitive. It's something that cannot be shared with our partners and with others within our supply chain. So I think all of these things, again, all demand a level of rigor and sophistication that 60 years ago, 40 years ago, you could get away with insurance, get away with very light due diligence, and you had much less threat vectors. But in the world we live in now, people, systems, and supply chain partnerships and understanding the geopolitical environment now have enormous, enormous effect on how you're doing business and where you're doing business and with who.
I think the examples that we're using might make some of our audience feel like, well, my organization's not that complex. I don't have a global supply chain. I don't do business with those foreign countries. But it's true, if you have a smartphone, you're vulnerable, depending on what apps you have on there. And there's obviously been a lot of, conversations around different social media platforms and who owns it and where does the data go. And, popular AI platforms and LLMs are, where does the data go? What does it train on? And so, these things will evolve. One thing I wanted to get your take on, because, we talked about this shortly before joining the recording is, you talked about geopolitical issues globally, and obviously there are geopolitical and sociopolitical issues here stateside that have made it difficult sometimes to talk about certain things without alienating or sounding hostile, or we've gotten away as a society, I think, on having um, nuanced conversations where we can meet in the middle. The things that we're talking about today, Dale, are threats to our teams, our organizations, our people, our communities, um, livelihoods, and all the things that we collectively care about. What's the advice to leaders on having conversations that could feel divisive, but to lead with civility and to do it in a way where, the outcome is good for everybody?
So let me address real quick, very briefly, that first part. I think when you talk about the threat vector of something can happen on your cell phone, it's everywhere, is valid. And the biggest thing, if you look at post COVID, coming out of COVID in 2022, we saw a 258% spike in cyber incidents that was purely tied to the work at home model. Now, I know a
Hmm.
lot of offices are coming back. We were living that same thing, but there's still probably 20 to 30% of your employee base that might never come back to the office, right? Or intermittently at best, right? Which means, which really drives the question of, have you really looked hard? And this is the due diligence. It's beyond how do they connect back into the work systems. The security of the home Wi-Fi matters now. The security of the home router matters because that
Yeah.
system is what's plugging back in to get information access for the workplace. So there's all kinds of risk within that chain. So I think your point that anything can happen anywhere is really, really important. And you think about the United States alone, you might not have a global conglomerate for the audience. Well, we have tornadoes that are ripping the center of the country out this past year. We're having earthquakes and hurricanes at scale we haven't had. There's been over 230 active shooter incidents in the United States. We're only 6 months into that data, meaning we are guaranteed another 250 plus active shooting events in this country. Simply put, it doesn't matter if you're in the United States and working from home or you have a global conglomerate and you're traveling globally. The threat vectors are everywhere and they're changing every single day. So I don't think you can compartmentalize yourself and say, well, we don't travel, we're not global. Like this doesn't apply because we're not doing business with India or Russia. It doesn't matter. The threat vectors right here in the United States are enough to keep me up at night and not sleep for weeks at a time also. Number two, to pivot to how do you have this conversation? We're doing it right now. I'm saying things that will sound sensational to many people because they live in a bubble. They don't think they're exposed. And it is the old adage that's never going to happen to me. Well, 700 people in Asheville, North Carolina, after getting wiped out by a hurricane that no one could have predicted, would say the same thing. The people in California, where you have enormous amounts of the Palisades in California burning to the ground, said the same thing. When Maui lit on fire and 100 people are burnt to death, if I asked the audience, is Maui a safe place? People's response would be, prior to that fire and that damage, would be, it's paradise. Nothing ever bad happens in Maui. If I asked you about the 2015 Paris attacks, where over 500 people are shot and killed, if I asked people about, well, is Paris safe? People would say, oh, it's a city of light, city of love. Nothing ever bad happens. I could go on and on and on. My point being, that concept of it can't happen to me, that happens to other people, whether you're in the United States, you're in Western Europe, or you're considered a medium high risk country, it truly is everywhere and it's changing and it's unpredictable now. The probability of being able to rate a country as low, medium, or high risk, that whole mantra no longer applies to the environment we're in. So to put a bow on this piece, I think if you're a leader in a corporate headquarters, and I'll use a vignette to kind of bring this to life. We're in a really complicated world, whether it's politics and we're afraid to talk about it, whether I say Mexican on this podcast, that does not mean I'm using it in a demeaning manner. I'm talking about the amount of corporate investment in Mexico and how important Mexico is as one of the key trading partners, just like Canada. We need to be really sensitive to this, and it's going to have real effect what's going on in this tariff world. I'm not talking negatively about Canadians or Mexicans. I'm talking about the importance of these relationships and how it's changing. And we have to, I think, as leaders, be willing to talk about hard things. I think as leaders, we can't avoid it. And here's why. In the world of social media and information sharing and the speed of light that things move now, I think if you look at large corporates and you have CEOs or C-suites that are unwilling to take a position, by being quiet, you've taken a position. I'd rather control the narrative, and I'm living this now. I'm running a firm and I have lots of Fortune 500 firms I'm responsible to. I would rather attempt to control the narrative knowing, because my employee base and my client base, they're an exact replication of where the population sits in this country and broadly internationally, where I have to assume that whatever policy I put out there, whatever position I put out there, 50% of the audience is going to cheer it and agree, and 50% is going to poo poo me and go, I hate that guy because I disagree with him. And I don't think we're ever going to get out of that world now. The genie's out of the bottle. This is the world we live in. You're going to satisfy half the audience, you're going to dissatisfy the other. And to your point, to use your language, I think we have to have a mature adult conversation. You do not have to agree with me on this podcast, and you can tell me I'm wrong and be critical of what I'm saying. I'm not going to be mad at you. You're not my enemy. I'm going to take it in and be self-reflective and say, do I have this wrong? Am I really threading the needle? Am I applying the right ethical and legal standard to this? What is the ethos that I'm adhering to? So I think ultimately, to summarize, that's the environment we're in. But I would rather take a position and be offensive about where the company sits, what our ethos is, and what my position is as a leader of the organization than to be quiet and avoid that hard conversation, because by doing that, you're taking a position and it's going to get thrown right back at you again in a similar manner. Silence is a choice. I'd rather at least have some control of the narrative to speak and to be able to answer questions when people disagree with me at my own firm or with my client base. I'd like to have that mature adult conversation, knowing I'm not going to satisfy everyone. That's not the world we live in, and that's just the way it is. That is how society is now designed, based on all of the information sharing, social media, and the echo chambers that some of our society lives in. It's okay.
You mentioned something in passing about you not getting much sleep and keeping you up at night. The things that we're talking about, can have that effect. Obviously, with our smartphones and the internet, everybody lives in a 24/7 news cycle. There are algorithms that show us things that will evoke a visceral reaction, and that some of the things that we're talking about can cause a lot of anxiety and worry and staying up at night, particularly if you are, as much of our audience is, in charge of people, in charge of, things much greater than just ourselves, and their physical safety as well. What are some things that you and your team do and advise your clients do to make sure that we're just not living in a, bubbling bath of anxiety 24/7?
Yeah. So being here where I'm at, on average, just as a place setter, we're dealing with a crisis of some kind every 38 hours. So the nature of my business, I can't fully get away. But what I can do is clearly communicate to the client base how to manage through these things. So from my perspective, of course, it's going to be, because of the chair I sit in, every major event in the world, whether it's a remote earthquake in Turkey or Morocco last year, where you would never think a corporate and family offering would be focused on, would have people there. We had people there we had to get out. So whether someone is hacked, someone is kidnapped, someone is under duress, someone has a medical requirement, someone has passed, I'm dealing with that right now. In any of all those scenarios, we're responding almost in real time. So by the nature of the business offering, we're in a perpetual state of emergency response, if you will. So my perspective will be skewed. I openly admit that to the audience. To answer your question, though, directly, is if I'm a leader in an organization or I'm an employee within a firm, to have solace and to be able to relax and have quality time with your family, or doing a hobby or executing a hobby and living your life, because of the 24 bombardment we all have. You see it every time you log on online, you hear it on the radio when you get in your car tonight to go home, and then you see it on TV when you click it on. We're just all inundated overwhelmingly with enormous amounts of information that can create an environment, if you let it, where this becomes cyclical and you feel this tense strain, if you will. The way you avoid that, Jerry, very simply put, is you have systems and you build a team. And I see that the biggest mistake I see in corporate America is resilience, resilience, resilience. We outsource it to one of the big consulting firms. We spend $100,000 building a 300-page book on resilience. And then the minute the Russians cross into Ukraine and the war starts, the minute Maui starts to burn, the minute that we have an active shooter in New York City, no one whips out the 300-page book because it's too complicated. It's not built for an emergency. So simply put, if you have one of those resiliency books, number one, our first advice is you need to boil it to about 10, no more than 15 individual PowerPoint slides that say kidnap and ransom. This is who we contact. This is how it works. This is what our coverage is. And you practice to it once or twice a year and you review it. If we have someone with a medical issue, same thing. This is who we contact. This is how it works. Here's the coverage. Here's the expectation. Go. Who's involved? HR, security manager. You have to use a sports analogy again, you all have a playbook for major predictable events that is boiled down to what team members are responsible, who can make a financial decision, who can make the go, no go, and what vendors you have in place to address this. And that way, and then you review it once, twice, 3 times a year. Simply put, this will allow you to sleep well as a leader, knowing that when you get that call at 3:00 in the morning, whether someone is kidnapped, hacked, in duress, has a medical problem, or they're pinned down in an environment, you have a playbook and you know the people are going to be involved. You know who's got a decision authority. You know who's got spend authority, and you know how you're going to communicate to your market, your clients, and or the family members of your employees that are involved. If you have those 15 slides, you will sleep much, much better. You will have solace knowing you've got a playbook, you've practiced it, you've communicated it, you're ready, and you're not starting and scrambling, trying to figure out what page and what chapter of your 300-page resiliency book you have, because it's never real. It never gets used. It's a check the box exercise that we've got to get away from. So I think that's how you find solace, is by being prepared for what you can be. Of course, the world's going to throw scenarios at all of us. I can't even imagine. You wouldn't believe half the things that get thrown at us. We've had people detained. We've had people arrested. We've had people kidnapped in scenarios you could never imagine. And none of it's on our brochure. None of it's on our website of, yes, you've had an employee in Africa that was arrested with diamonds in their pocket. Let me roll out our SOP for that. There isn't one. We have to, utilize the team, figure out the situation, start pulling in contacts, so on and so forth. So my point being, and I'll end this, is in this world of 24-hour information overload, your solace, your happy place, and your ability to relax and not be in this never-ending cycle and sleep well is to be prepared to the level you can be with the basics of what is projectable, what's predictable. If you have that in place, and then every time you have one of these, you stand up the team, the key leaders, we review where we're at, and you say go, you will sleep just fine.
I think, one thing that our audience should think about is this, balance of exhaustive preparation, which is not possible, and sufficient preparation, which is possible to a degree. And then that definition changes. I'll end on a final note here. Give us your take. There's so many things that, leaders are worried about, thinking about. Hopefully, the things that we talked about today, Dale, are not brand new ideas, right? As these threats and these concerns should be, top of mind. Perhaps the breadth of which, or the depth of some, are new and gets people thinking, so that we can keep more people safe, so that we can keep organizations functioning, and so that some of us can sleep better at night. What is the first thing, or the one thing that our leaders can do today to, best prepare themselves for the challenges of, espionage and threats tomorrow?
So it starts with a question that will drive the answers to this very, very simple question, but loaded question. is going to drive actions as a leader and then throughout the entire organization. So, to your point, the concept of insurance, the concept of having a vendor for car and driver, a vendor for aviation, a vendor for intelligence, software, tracking platforms, alert platforms, cyber protection, kidnap and ransom insurance, camera surveillance, access control. None of those concepts are new. That's relatively baked into the corporate space, if you will. What's changing is the threat vectors that now need integration of all those systems. The biggest weakness we have in corporate headquarters is they're siloed. The HR director has insurance and benefits and medical. The chief information security has infrastructure and people and a few other systems, camera surveillance, access control. Your chief information security officer has cyber and IT, and they don't talk and they're not integrated. So when you look at that, the first key question is we have these different platforms with insurance rolled over top of it. The key question you have to ask yourself, and it's the hard question, is so what? I have insurance. Okay, read the fine print of insurance. Travel insurance does not cover war zones, does not cover natural disasters, and does not cover terrorism. You now have a gap. If you go to your duty care provider and go, are you going to evacuate 500 people out of Ukraine or Kabul when it's falling, or the next hurricane, or are you going to get 700 people out of Asheville when it gets wiped out by a hurricane? If you read the fine print, the contract has the exact same restrictions. You now have a gap. So the leadership group now that they've asked themselves, so what? Now they have to fill the gap. And that's the trick to this whole thing. It's the ability to go deeper and deeper and deeper. If you have kidnap and ransom insurance, number one, do you know who's actually going to negotiate your people back? Have you taken a 30-minute class with them? And more importantly, the so what question. What does it not cover? So let's say we negotiate you back, Jerry, as you're taken, pick a country, you're taken in Kenya. And we've negotiated with your insurance provider and the service provider. We've gotten the green light where you're going to come back, we're going to pay a ransom, and you're going to come back to our custody safe and alive. That's great. Read the fine print and ask, how is the payment for your life executed? If the payment is hard cash, is that covered by your insurance? And what you're going to find is 95% plus time, it's not. And it gets put on the company. My point is, in every one of these scenarios, kidnap and ransom, medical evacuation, security evacuation, being hacked, having a assault or someone intruder in your headquarters, whatever the case might be, you need to ask yourself the so what question. I have insurance or I have a vendor. Now ask so what. Go deeper into that, run the scenario, and then find the gaps, because this is what's happening consistently in this new complicated world we started the conversation with, is once the incident starts, people are now surprised to find out, oh, we don't actually have an answer. I didn't realize that we had kidnap and ransom insurance, but we're responsible to pay it. I didn't realize that we have someone that's sick or injured in a car accident in a remote part of Africa, that because there's no ambulatory service in the third world, we're responsible to move them from where they got injured or sick to get them to a hospital or clinic, and that the coverage doesn't kick off until they get to that hospital or clinic. Asking the so what question and running the scenario from the beginning of the incident all the way through. That is the rigor that is now required in this complicated world. And that is what's going to get you through, one, a really tough situation. And it's also going to avoid finding out that you don't actually have what you thought you had. And it's because the due diligence and the rigor of running the so what question, that's where corporate America is failing, if you will, because of the speed and veracity of all these different threats we're facing.
Though this has been a super fascinating conversation. One I wish we didn't have to have, but one that I am glad we're having. I think, as the world continues to change and the speed of change only accelerates, and we didn't even talk about AI, which you should come back and so we can talk about the impact of AI and everything that we talked about today. But thank you for sharing your experience. I hope that our audience, again, isn't, too alarmed, but alarmed just enough to know that these are real threats and then real scenarios that people should be thinking about. And so, whether it is with Dale's organization or some, people that are already in business with you, We hope that you continue to think about these things so that we can, be safer and better prepared for tomorrow. I'm Dale Buckner, CEO of Global Guardian. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jerry. Really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
That will do it for this week's episode. See you next week on Tomorrowist, everybody. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe to Tomorrowist wherever you get your podcasts. We also publish a weekly newsletter with in-depth articles and the latest SHRM research to help keep you in the know about the trends shaping the future of work. You can subscribe and find all of our episodes on our website at shrm.org/Tomorrowist. Thanks for listening. And remember, the workplace is changing rapidly. You don't have to be a futurist, be a Tomorrowist.
SHRM.